Welcome to Revisiting the Vault, a podcast where we're looking at the history of art, animation, music, and just about everything else, but through a Disney lens. I am Mary Ratliff. I am a writer, filmmaker, visual art nerd.
And I'm Gretchen Harwell. I am not really any of those things. I like to sew. I like fashion. I'm a vet tech. I'm a mom.
We were talking about the forgetting and the Neverland forgetting.
All of that brought me to Peter uses Wendy to make the mermaids jealous.
Mm-hmm.
Peter uses Wendy to make Tinkerbell jealous. And then he says, like, at the very beginning, really, he tells Wendy that Tinkerbell said she's just a big, ugly girl.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all this stuff where, like, Tinkerbell is, like, looking at her reflection in the mirror and she's having a hard time. They're fat-shaming her because of her hips, and it's just like, man.
That was the point where I put down my notebook and had to go to the computer because, first of all, Tinkerbell is a sex symbol. I know she's from a kid's movie. I know she is a children's movie character.
Yeah.
The world is what it is. The internet is what it is. Tinkerbell is a sex symbol. There's talk that she was designed to be based on Marilyn Monroe, but the animators have said that wasn't actually an intentional thing. They were just drawing a cute girl, basically. But at the same time, that hourglass figure that they gave her, because this is another thing where it's like, Tinkerbell does not actually exist. She is drawn by male animators. She was designed by male animators.
Yes.
Men decided that Tinkerbell was the shape that she was.
Yes, and that her legs were 7 miles long.
Right. They made those decisions, and they gave her that hourglass figure because that was considered sexy. And then they also spend the entire first 5 minutes that she exists in this movie giving her shit for it.
Yes.
She stands on this mirror and she's like, oh, look at me, I'm cute. She's self-centered, okay, sure. And then she looks down and she sees her hips in the mirror, like, from that angle. Nobody looks good in a low angle, by the way. She looks down and then she does this thing where she, like, puts her hands on her hips and, like, holds them up. Because Tinkerbell doesn't talk in this movie.
Right.
She just makes little sounds. And she's very clearly being like, oh my god, are my hips really that big? And then the next thing that happens is she gets trapped in a drawer. She's trying to fly out of the drawer because she's jealous that Peter is talking to Wendy. Talking to, not flirting with, not anything else. Just acknowledging the existence of a female. And Tinkerbell is literally glowing red instead of yellow because she is that upset. And so she tries to fly out of the drawer and she can't fly through the keyhole because her hips are too big to fit through the keyhole. And I am just like, Tinkerbell, you are beautiful just the way you are. All of y'all can just go step off.
Yeah.
The only thing I can say that's okay is that no character in the movie says anything about Tinkerbell's size or shape.
Yeah.
But Tinkerbell herself clearly expresses displeasure with her shape, and then they make it a joke that her hips are too big for her to do something. And that means the movie, the animators, the directors, the writers, the Walt Disney Animation Studios chose to fat shame Tinkerbell. And that is stupid. It's ridiculous. It makes me so mad. Because Tinkerbell is flippin' cute. She's adorable.
I know. She's so cute, and it burns me up. Also, It's totally obvious that men designed her because she's got 7 mile long legs and a waist as big around as my pinky fingernail.
She is drawn to be sexy, and that is something that... What place does this have here? Why is she like that? Why did they make that choice? But Wendy is 100% the wholesome mother character.
Yes, this was a thing that I wanted to talk about.
She is the wholesome, pure mother. Tinkerbell is jealous of Wendy, and Tinkerbell is set up in opposition to Wendy, because women are in opposition to each other in every single scene in this movie in which there is more than one woman, except for Mrs. Darling, who would be okay if not for the fact that she actually utters the phrase, "Don't be so harsh with your father, dear, you know he doesn't mean it." And I'm like, well, then tell your husband not to say such crap.
Yes.
19 teens in England, she couldn't have said that. Well, okay. Anyway, so if Wendy is in opposition to Tinkerbell, and in opposition to the mermaids, and in opposition to Tiger Lily, and I have now named all of the women in this movie, notice the difference between Wendy's character design of a pure light blue nightgown and talking about mothers and singing lullabies and being kind and sewing Peter's shadow back on, and Tinkerbell, who looks like a Barbie doll, and the mermaids who have the shell bras and everything else going on, and Tiger Lily, who is exoticized and sexualized in a way that we just do not have time for, because we are 100% going to probably spend an hour on it when we get to Pocahontas.
Yeah.
If you look at that, okay, what is the difference here? Wendy is pure, and they are drawn sexy.
That's exactly where I was going, is they were really kind of laying on the whole Mother Madonna, a woman's greatest joy and her duty are her children. And the best a mom can want to be, the best a woman or a girl can want to be is to grow up to be a mom.
There's a line where, before Wendy sings her little lullaby, where she says something about mothers are the most wonderful things in the world. She's really laying it on. And there's a part of me that had a nice little, like, moment with that, because I have a wonderful relationship with my mother. I love my mother very dearly, and she is truly a wonderful woman. I also have many, many friends who do not have that story. The mothers who do love their children and who do work very hard and who are trying so hard to give their kids a good life, I do want to honor them, and I do want to say nice things about them, and I do want Wendy to sing a lullaby about those women. But I also don't want to say that the definition of a mother is a wonderful, wholesome, perfect person.
And when you kind of perpetuate that, you do sort of risk making people who don't have a great relationship with their mothers feel somehow inadequate.
Right.
Or you make moms who feel imperfect feel inadequate. But also, I think we've established Peter's a little shit in this movie.
I said that all of my friends came in and said Peter Pan steals children. I don't think that Peter Pan actually steals children. Maybe in the book. But what I would do is I would split a hair. And I would say that Peter Pan convinces children to run away with him.
He's a bad influence. He's Lampwick again.
With no regard to consequences and to anything else other than his own entertainment or his own needs or wants.
I mean, he really is. He's like a 13-year-old boy.
He takes Wendy to Neverland because he wants Wendy to keep telling him stories. They establish that that's one of the things that moms do, and it's much more clear in the book. But Wendy is taken to Neverland to be a mother to the Lost Boys and to Peter.
Yeah.
It bothers me that the inciting incident of the movie is George Darling saying, "That's it, Wendy, you're out of the nursery. I can't let you be a bad influence on my sons anymore. Telling my boys stories, filling their head with nonsense." They say, "Okay, Wendy, it's your last night in the nursery. You have to grow up." And then she tells Peter, "I have to grow up tomorrow." And he basically looks at her and says, "You don't have to grow up because you're going to come to Neverland with me and not grow up. But you're going to have a bunch of responsibilities, and they include taking care of me and all of my friends.
So stay young looking, but grow up."
Right.
I think this kind of sums it up, too. Peter plays Tink against Wendy. He plays Wendy against the mermaids. He plays every girl against every other girl. And then, when, spoiler alert, Hook has given Peter a time bomb.
Right? Which they have switched. He poisons him in the original book and play.
Well, either way, he should have died, so it's fine. But he sends him a bomb, and Tinkerbell, she's imprisoned on the ship. She goes to save Peter before helping the kids, when Peter has just been nothing but a shitheel to her.
I know.
What the fuck kind of Stockholm Syndrome is this?
She can only have one emotion at a time, Gretchen.
Yeah, well, she got a tiny little lady brain.
I was going to say, she literally has a little lady brain.
Yes. And then he's all apologetic. And he's like, "Oh, no. You mean more to me than anything else." And she's like, "Okay, but why were you using Wendy to make me jealous? And why were you using me in the, what the hell is happening?"
He banishes Tink because she has the Lost Boys shoot at Wendy. And he banishes her instead of being like, "Tink, what's wrong? Why were you so mad at Wendy? Like, she could have died." Of course, he's a 12-year-old boy. He's not a dad. He doesn't have any of the, gentle parenting skills or whatever. Okay, fine. But he just goes off and he just does not give a shit about what has happened to Tink. She gets kidnapped. Doesn't matter.
Yes.
He doesn't care. Doesn't notice.
And then he's like, "Oh, you mean more to me than anything." Does she? Because that's not a great way to treat somebody who means more to you than anything else in the world.
Right. And it's... Peter has this moment, and you called it out too, where... Unfortunately, the catalyst for this moment is Wendy getting jealous of Tiger Lily. The only thing I can say that is at least a positive is that Tiger Lily doesn't get jealous of anyone.
Yeah.
Thankfully. Because she's not on screen long enough. I think literally the only thing she says out loud is help. But Wendy has gotten jealous of Tiger Lily. She's mad because she has been told that because she is a girl, she can't participate in the party. And all the boys are whooping it up and having fun and don't even notice that she is being put to work. And so she just is like, I'm going home. Fine. See ya.
Yeah.
Well, thank goodness, Wendy, you are finally doing something because they are mistreating you. You should stand up for yourself. And then they get back and they're still singing that damn song. And she tells her brothers, we're going to go to bed, but we're going home in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts this whole thing. And she's just like, no, I've made up my mind. We're going home in the morning. She explains, we can't just leave our mom. We need our mom. We need to go home. And Peter says something like, don't you want to stay here? Everybody loves me.
Yeah.
They do, though. It comes across as this thing where you want to be, you're such an egotistical little shit that you're not even seeing what's in front of you. But they do. Everyone on the island absolutely adores Peter Pan for reasons I cannot fathom because what he's actually done for them.
Exactly. Tinkerbell is like, okay, these people are about to get murdered, but let me go save Peter, who's been nothing but an asshole. And at the end, Wendy tells her mother, oh, it was such a wonderful adventure. She's talking about these things, and she's just like, no, it wasn't a wonderful adventure. Peter's a jerk.
Yeah.
This is not a fun time.
If I wanted to go, and again, like I said, this is not in the text. This is me applying something else to it, and it is probably something I'm pulling from all those young adult books that are trying to, like, make Peter Pan more interesting these days. If you want to look at this as a tale of, like, a first crush, when you're, like, on the cusp between being a kid and an adult, it's this little girl's first crush on a boy. She doesn't really recognize that it's a crush. She doesn't really quite see that yet. I mean, she says something about giving him a kiss. If you look at it that way, there's a whole lot of stuff that has been written really eloquently about sort of the temporariness of first love, and that first loves usually are destined to end, and that's sort of what's beautiful about them. That's written very well in some places and not in others. But, okay, you know, I can start to give it that and go there if I wanted to. You want to see a story about a girl coming of age and dealing with going from becoming a child to a teenager. Watch Labyrinth and just call it a day. Labyrinth handles it much better. Have you seen Labyrinth? You have, right?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Nope.
And then there's this implication at the very end where George says something about, like, I feel like I've seen that ship before.
Yeah.
What does that mean, George? Does that mean that you were a pirate at one point? Does that mean that you went to Neverland when you were a boy, but you've forgotten about it because Neverland makes you forget? Were you a lost boy, George?
Yeah. I think it's supposed to mean that he's suddenly like, oh, yes, I remember what it was to be a kid.
Childhood wonder and imagination were a thing that I used to do.
Exactly. Maybe he is kind of remembering that, and it's like a little bit sweet. But at the same time, that one moment of softness from him doesn't make up for an entire childhood full of him being a shit.
No. And I get that he is, that's probably a lot of how dads were in the early 1900s in England, but doesn't make it right. So I've mentioned this a couple times. I watched Hook yesterday. Extremely critically panned and not particularly successful box office-wise when it came out. But I remember when I first watched it in the 90s thinking, well, that was pretty good. I actually enjoyed that movie. And always remembering it a little bit fondly. I was 11 or 12 the last time I watched this, so let's watch it and see if it's any better. Are these characters always terrible? Is Peter always fully self-centered and annoying? Is Tinkerbell always going to be a psychopath? Turns out Hook is not available to stream for free unless you have a Starz subscription, which I don't. So, shout out to my best friend Cindy, who had a random free rental code for Vudu, and gave it to me instead of using it herself so that I could watch Hook yesterday.
That's a friend.
Thank you, Cindy, for supporting my podcast. That's our first donation.
Our first sponsor.
First sponsor. This movie, 10 minutes in, I'm already much more interested in everything that's happening because the characters actually, like, have some motivations. He is, at this point, Peter Banning, corporate lawyer in mergers and acquisitions. He's a professional asshole who misses his son's baseball games and breaks promises all the time. And Moira, his wife, she's the granddaughter of Wendy Darling. So, in the movie Hook, they go to England because the Great Ormond Street Hospital, which is the hospital that actually owns the copyright to Peter Pan because J.M. Barrie gifted it to them at his death. They are dedicating a wing to Wendy Darling because it turns out that she has been helping orphans her entire life. They walk into the house, and Wendy Darling is being played by Maggie Smith, Dame Maggie Smith.
Yes.
She walks out onto the top of the stairs, looks down, and she just says, Peter. And he looks up at her, and it is Maggie Smith and Robin Williams having a wordless exchange of emotion that in that 5 seconds contained more depth, interest, character, and story than the entire 75 minutes of the 1953 Peter Pan.
Yeah.
And it is because Maggie Smith and Robin Williams are phenomenally good actors.
Yes.
It's also because the bar was very, very low.
Well, there is that. The fact that she could convey something with just a look as opposed to this travesty of a movie.
I felt no emotions watching Peter Pan except anger. None.
Yeah, I felt rage.
None. I never at any point cared about what was happening. I never got emotionally involved whatsoever. And in Hook, about 12 or 13 minutes in, they go to the dedication ceremony for this hospital, and Peter is giving a speech about Wendy and how important she is to his life. Because in this movie, he came back from Neverland at one point, and she has a granddaughter. She's gotten old. He sees Moira, he sees that Wendy has gotten older, and he decides to never go back to Neverland because he's finally ready to grow up. But then he completely forgets who he is. So he's still Peter Banning at this point, and he gives a speech about how Wendy took him in when she found him when he had nothing, and that she gave him parents, and she gave him love. He knows that he probably doesn't know anything about the other people in the room, and maybe they don't have anything in common, but he knows that they're all here to honor Wendy. And then the other people in the room start standing up to signify that they were also orphans that she saved.
Mm-hmm.
I cried.
Yeah.
Wendy's sitting there, she's tearing up, and I'm just like, it's so wonderful right now. This is so lovely. And then, of course, the next scene is they find out their kids have been kidnapped.
Well, like you do.
Also, here's another thing that Hook does that is so much better. They come home and find out that their kids are missing. They see the housekeeper is like crying on the stairwell or something because they didn't leave the kids there alone. They actually left someone with them.
What?
They actually showed parents upset that their children are missing. And the consequences of someone just taking children to Neverland.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what a gut-wrenching experience that would be.
And the actress who plays Moira, she doesn't really get a whole ton to do. But the main thing that she does at this point is grieve for the fact that her children are missing. In an extremely accurate way. It's heart-wrenching. And I know in the Disney Peter Pan, the kids get home right as the parents are coming home from the party is what it looks like.
Right.
So, they kind of never knew they were missing.
Yeah.
Because the entire plot of the movie Hook is about how this guy does not know he is Peter Pan. He's terrified of flying. He has forgotten everything about Neverland. And he is still just like, no, I am going to get my kids.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, then he flounders and, there's a whole thing where he has to learn to be Peter Pan again. That's the plot of the movie.
Right.
The thread throughout the whole movie is that this man loves his children and wants them back. And that is such an opposite to the actual original narrative.
Right.
This is a problem that I have with almost all of the sort of magical world, Narnia, wardrobe-y stories. I know there's a term for these, but I can't remember what it is. But that's a problem that I have with all of these. The parents are rarely present in those stories.
Oh, yeah. The parents are almost always dead or just not there.
Yeah.
I think in some instances, time doesn't pass.
Right. The plot of these stories, especially when they're young adult books, but a lot of times when they're movies too, is that this kid gets sucked into this other world where they're having these fantastical adventures. There's always this thing of am I going to go home? Do I want to go home? Do I want to stay here? And sometimes they'll acknowledge if I just disappeared, it would ruin my parents forever. Because my parents love me.
Right.
They usually don't. It's usually just not even a thought.
Yeah, they're like, oh, it's time for my adventure. Let's do this.
These kids in these stories, they're like, oh, but I want to go home because I miss my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fair. You probably do. That's a good reason to go home. But, your mom misses you too.
Right.
It's something that I don't know that I would have really had that much of a conception for as a kid, but these books are being written by grown-ups. This media is being created by grown-ups. And it's just a weird thing that I've just never really seen that perspective all that much. Now, that said, one of the things I mentioned in the notes that I did want to bring up, because I forgot to bring it up in the Alice in Wonderland episode, but it sort of relates to both. There's a series of books called the Wayward Children series by Seanan McGuire. The first book has one of the best book titles I've ever heard in my life. It's called Every Heart a Doorway. The entire point of this series of novels is that it is the aftermath of children who have gone on these adventures, who have fallen through a doorway. And how hard it is for them to reintegrate into the normal world. Yeah. So they end up getting sent off to this school for wayward children. Anyway, the story of Peter Pan is just so I don't even know where I'm going with this. Like, I feel like I've completely derailed on my point. But because, you know, I want to say that it's just such a childish point of view, but anybody listening to this is just going to be like, well, obviously. I don't necessarily think that children's entertainment needs to always teach them a lesson. It doesn't. Sometimes it can just be entertaining. That's fine. But at the same time, I had a film professor that one of the things that she would tell us is that you're responsible for what you put out in the world. That was her saying that, like, you can't just write a scene and be like, well, the character did that. I hate that.
That's also denying your own intention.
Exactly. I mean, that's the whole thing of, we can't say Tinkerbell put on a short skirt.
Right.
Tinkerbell did not wear her skirt that short. Tinkerbell was drawn by an animator to have a skirt that short.
Right.
Authors make choices, and they are responsible for them. So there is part of me that is just like, what is the lesson for children in Peter Pan? What are they supposed to get out of it?
Your hips are too fat.
Yeah.
And even if he's an asshole, love him anyway.
So this is what it becomes when we talk about whether or not we recommend these movies. There are several where I've said, okay, is it good? Is it not? I don't know. Do you really want to show it to your kids? What age do you want to show it to your kids? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Do not. This is not a, I don't recommend. This is not a, you should skip it. This is a, I believe that this film is bad for children.
Yes, I agree. And in a way, it makes me want to reconsider, because there were several where you're like, it's okay, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, nope, don't like it. And now I'm like, a little perspective.
Right.
But then at the same time, honestly, though, like, I don't really take back what I said about those movies, but this one's just worse. For me, it comes down to, again, not just that there are better movies to watch.
And there are. I mean, watch Hook, 100%. Watch Hook and then watch Tinkerbell. It's what I did yesterday. Way better.
So many other movies are better to watch.
Mm-hmm.
There are, in order of magnitudes, better to watch. And even if they're bad, they're not this offensively bad. Right. I had to stop and explain to my daughter so many times, okay, that's not okay. This is not okay. This is not okay. Mm-hmm. This is just objectively, for me, there's nothing redeeming about this movie.
It's also very violent to a level that I think is excessive, even for the 1950s.
Cannibal Cove, Hangman's Tree.
We talked about Pinocchio being violent and scary, and we didn't sort of understand like what age it was for. But this one, they are constantly talking about slitting throats.
Yes.
One of the things that I noted was when they kidnap Tiger Lily, they've got her tied to an anchor in a rising tide. Hook says there is no path through water to the happy hunting ground.
Yes.
What the actual... Because it's not even just that, like, he has taken this child, this literal child, kidnapped her from her family, tied her to an anchor, is threatening her with a slow drowning to try to get her to give up the location of her friend. He's not just threatening her with death. He also makes sure to remind her that she cannot go to heaven if she dies this way.
Yeah.
And they think that I'm not going to want him to get eaten by the crocodile?
I want everybody to get eaten by the crocodile in this stupid movie.
Captain Hook is not a good villain. You know, I've been talking so much about how Disney does villains well. Captain Hook is not a good villain.
No.
He has one scene where he really looks villainous. He's got a couple things that he does, the whole thing where he says the thing to Tiger Lily, that are pretty dark and everything, but he's just so bumbling, and he's just so, like, he says Smee 1,000,000 times.
Yeah.
And he's incompetent, so they're trying to play up this thing where he's having a nervous breakdown. It does not, none of it flies for me. But in Hook, Dustin Hoffman is doing some stuff. He is a villain.
Right.
He's very clearly a villain. He is literally twirling his curly mustache. And again, you know, Hook had its flaws, but the heart is there. Robin Williams puts in a phenomenal performance in that movie. The entire point of the movie is that sometimes you do need to grow up and you do need to be an adult, but you shouldn't lose your sense of wonder and imagination in childhood. And it's about family and not putting other things above your family and stuff. If your kids are like, oh, what's this Peter Pan thing? Say, let's go watch Hook.
Yes, honestly, the story that was told better over here.
And if they think Tinkerbell looks cute, watch Tinkerbell. I watched the first one. I know that apparently Tinkerbell and the Never Beast makes people cry. You said it to me, but I've also heard a couple other people tell me that Tinkerbell and the Pirate Fairy is just very good.
There are even good songs in The Pirate Fairy. There's the song, The Frigate That Flies. It's good. I mean, it's hands down better than this nonsense.
And it's got an adorable mouse named Cheese. I feel like there's so many things that I wrote down to maybe talk about Peter Pan without just being like, this is what sucked and this is what sucked. I had a brief conversation with my husband right before I came in here where I mentioned that I don't understand why Peter Pan is fighting with a dagger and trying to fight a rapier with a dagger. It just felt really weird to me. And Philip was just like, well, one of them's really more of like this kind of weapon and this kind of thing. And if you watch, especially because Peter can fly the way that he's doing this, and then when he promises that he can't fly, he starts doing more dodging and blocking. And I'm like, wait, are you telling me that in a movie where they got almost nothing right?
They got the weapon, the fight scenes right.
They did no research on Native Americans. Are you telling me that in this movie, they actually got the fight scenes vaguely correct? And he was like, well, I mean, it could have been choreographed a little better, but yeah. If they took the time even to do the movement studies for this, to get that part right, why did they not even check to see if they should draw teepees or longhouses?
I think that, honestly, they didn't care.
They didn't. And that is why the racism in this movie is just so deeply terrible.
Yeah.
It is so clear that neither in 1911 when the book was first published or in 1953 when this movie came out, in neither time period did any man working on any part of this ever give a crap about a Native American.
Right.
They didn't view them as worthy of their attention and their intelligence and their time. And that bothers me so much. One of the first things Captain Hook says about them is he says that they could ask the Indians where Peter Pan is because, again, I apologize, the Redskins know every inch of this island.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get the slurs out there early, Captain Hook. But he is at least the bad guy, I guess. But then, for the rest of the movie, they basically, everyone, including the tribe themselves, refer to themselves as Injuns.
Yeah.
It made me twitch every time they did it. It's possible that people listening to this have noticed how much, like, sometimes I contort the sentence to say Native Americans. Native American and Indian are not necessarily interchangeable terms, but in America, most of the time, either can be appropriate and acceptable.
Yes, because there are Native American groups who call themselves American Indians.
Right. The word Indian only becomes offensive in particular ways that it can be used. If you were talking about someone who has called themselves an Indian or an American Indian, that's okay. But Native American is just a more polite term, just to, like, get all of that out of the way. But these men in 1953 would not have seen a problem, and society as a whole would not have seen a problem with those terms at that time. Those terms would have been fine at that time for everyone except the Native Americans who were trying to tell people, by the way, we don't like to be called that. That's insulting.
Exactly.
The animators at Walt Disney Studios in California at that time would not have heard that message. Because they would not have been listening to those people, and they would not have had those people in their life to tell them that. So, I'm not going to be like, they actively were trying to be super racist and use the worst terms possible. No, they were careless. They were careless in a way that was a result of culture systemically devaluing the personhood of Native Americans. It just makes me so mad. That song, it's so, ugh. And then the way the chief talks, where he talks in that, like, broken pidgin English.
Oh, I hated all of that.
It was just so gross. And the other thing that bothers me a little bit is that I absolutely know, for sure, that if I started saying these things to people more often, or, like, when this podcast goes out, there are going to be people that are being like, it's not that bad, come on, it was just a funny joke.
But that's the thing. I mean, it is. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's the problem, is that it's just a joke, is that it's unimportant, is that was the cultural thing at the time. Like, it's a problem, and it starts with things like this. And I can't go back in time and tell the literal 9 old men of Disney Animation Studios that they should be ashamed of themselves or whatever. And Lord knows I have no idea if later on in their life they actually learned and grew and they felt bad about it. But let's just, A, let's not do it anymore. Let's stop. But B, we don't need to keep this movie in our lives. It is fine for adults who are studying animation history or doing something like us where we can watch it and we can watch it with full understanding of the context and the problems, see it for what it is, but there is absolutely no reason to ever show this movie to a child. And it's not because I think that kids can't handle it. It does have some weird darkness. It is too violent. It is weirdly violent. But at the same time, the violence is like a weird cartoonish way that if you were watching Looney Tunes at the time, you were probably getting that. Okay, sure, but it's just, watch Cinderella again instead.
Yeah, watch almost anything else instead. Watch Hook and watch the new Tinkerbell movies and just let this one fall by the wayside.
Watch the new Tinkerbell movies. They're super cute. The character design is adorable on all the little fairies.
Yeah.
Just go watch 101 Dalmatians, because I think that one's our next one, isn't it?
I think Lady and the Tramp is next.
Instead of watching Peter Pan, watch Lady and the Tramp.
Yes.
It has some racist cats, but maybe we're going to watch that and find out that they weren't as bad as we remember, because coming off of Peter Pan, what is?
Yes, and I will say Lady and the Tramp is one that I for sure have not seen.
Really? Do you know anything about it at all?
I know that there's a Cocker Spaniel and a Schnauzer.
Go watch Lady and the Tramp. Don't watch Peter Pan if you haven't already. We're sorry if we convinced you to watch it in the last episode.
I feel like we didn't. I hope we didn't.
But if you watched it because of us, we apologize. But go watch Lady and the Tramp. Enjoy some cute puppers. We'll meet back to hopefully talk about better things. Revisiting the Vault is a 9-Hour Films production, and it's edited by Mary Ratliff. Our music is by Music Motion and Lynn Publishing. We are not affiliated with or authorized by the Walt Disney Company. You can find us on Twitter at Revisit the Vault, and you can find our website at revisitingthevault.com. Don't forget to check out our Patreon. Patrons can get personalized thank you cards, stickers, and access to deleted scenes and outtakes. You can find that over at patreon.com/9hourfilms. If you want to support us, the best thing you can do is to tell other people about the show, and make sure that you leave a review in whatever app you're using to listen. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.